Waste of Space, Chapter 12. And this is from the official NASA Procedures for Contact with Intelligent Extraterrestrial Life Manual, Alien Appearance. It is important to note that the IEL may look radically different than we expect. Years of Hollywood movies and other mass entertainments have conditioned us to believe that any IEL will look something like us, with bipedal body structure and an obvious head, among other traits. This will probably not be the case. Although the basics of chemistry indicate that any IEL will most likely be carbon based, as we are, there are an infinite number of possible body forms an IEL might have, any one of which might be startling, unsettling, or even frightening to observe. Do not judge the IEL based upon its physical appearance. Keep in mind that even if an IEL appears hideous to us, that is based upon our own species-centric experience, and we might look equally as hideous to it. Honest to God food. Lunar day 252, T-minus 20 hours to evacuation. It's such a shame, Dr. Goldstein said. We were no longer in my residence, even though that was where she had been waiting for me. Violet had let her in, but then had gone off to find my parents. It had been impossible to have a conversation with Lars raging in Nina's residence next door. Lars had been shouting so loud the walls had actually trembled. So we were now in the greenhouse. This gave us some privacy to talk, and it also allowed me to help Dr. Goldstein get things prepared for the evacuation. All the plants she had worked so hard to grow now had to be composted in hopes that, should MBA come back online, there would be usable soil to restart the greenhouse with once again. There was a plus side to this, however. All the fruits and vegetables that she had grown were going to be served up for dinner that night. What's a shame? I asked. Dr. Goldstein waved at all the plants around her. 8 months of work right down the tubes. I was finally getting the hang of this, and now it's all going to go to waste. She grabbed a strawberry plant by the stalk, but hesitated before uprooting it. She looked like a woman who'd been asked to put down her pet dog. It occurred to me that Dr. Goldstein probably loved her plants as much as most people love their animals. She'd spent hours each day for the past few months nurturing them, tending to them, struggling to keep them alive. There were some insects at MBA that had been brought up to see how life on the moon would affect them, ants and bees and earthworms, but they were locked away in terrariums and no one had really considered them to be pets. Even so, the ones that survived would get to live. They were coming back to Earth with us so that their vitals could be studied. The plants all had to die. Do you want me to do that? I asked. Dr. Goldstein looked at me, startled, as if perhaps she had been so upset she'd forgotten that I was there. Yes, she said thankfully, if you wouldn't mind. So I went to work uprooting the plants while Dr. Goldstein harvested the vegetables. She started with the snap peas, twisting each pod off the vine and plunging it into a small bowl. On the other side of the glass walls, the base was humming with activity. I could still hear Lars Schoberg raging. Everyone else was doing their best to ignore it, although now and then I noticed someone glance towards Nina's residence, either feeling sorry for Nina or feeling fed up with Lars. I didn't poison him, Dr. Goldstein said. I turned to her, surprised. She'd said it so quietly, I wasn't sure if she even meant for it to be out loud. Lars? I asked, and then winced at my own stupidity. It wasn't like there had been any other poisoning victims at MBA. Yes, Dr. Goldstein didn't look at me. She stayed focused on her peas. I know you found out about the apple seeds. How? After the Schobergs got in here last month and ate all the strawberries, I rigged up a sensor system. Now, whenever somebody enters the greenhouse, I get an alert, and then I can check the camera feeds. Wouldn't it have been easier to just put a lock on the door? That isn't my decision to make. The greenhouse is communal property for everyone at MBA. I only grow the plants. Dr. Goldstein plunked a few more peas in the bowl. I watched all the footage of you in here. I thought you might have been trying to eat something without permission at first, but you didn't. It took me a while to figure out what you'd been up to. I glanced up at the top of the greenhouse door, and sure enough, there was a security camera there. It would have offered a decent view of us inside the room, although, like most of the cameras at MBA, it probably didn't record sound. Otherwise, Dr. Goldstein would have known what we were doing right away. I didn't even know the seeds were gone until after you noticed, Dr. Goldstein said. You didn't? I have thousands of seeds in here. It never occurred to me that anyone would steal them. Even after you heard that Lars had been poisoned? I didn't know that it had been done on purpose. Nina said it was an accident. Dr. Goldstein snapped off a few more peas. It wasn't until you found the seeds were missing that I realized what must have really happened. I uprooted the last of the strawberry plants and laid it on the pile with the rest. There was something awful about the sight of it. It reminded me of that horrible moment in the Lorax where the very last of the truffle trees has been cut down. So you knew cyanide could be made with apple seeds? Of course, plants are my specialty. That's why I collected the apple seeds in the first place. I looked at her, surprised. Not for growing apples? Dashiell, apple trees are enormous. I couldn't possibly grow one to full fruiting height in here. Well, I thought maybe you knew how to do a dwarf version. Cyanide, when properly handled, is a very effective pesticide. We don't have any pests in the base. It's supposed to be sterile. Well, that doesn't mean it'll stay that way. No matter how hard we try, there's always a chance that something will get through, especially when you're dealing with organic matter. Dr. Goldstein's gaze dropped to the packs of poop she had stored under the planting table as though they might be a breeding ground for trouble. I figured it paid to be prepared. She pointed at the plants that I had laid out. Why don't you pluck the strawberries off those? Then she lowered her voice conspiratorially. If one or two went missing, I'd never notice. Really? I asked, unable to control my excitement. I understand it's your birthday. I looked over the strawberries. It had been 8 months since I'd had one, given that the Schobergs had devoured the last crop. As much as I wanted one, I had conflicting emotions. It seemed wrong to take one for myself before everyone else got to share. Plus, I wondered if Dr. Goldstein was trying to distract me from the topic at hand, or to buy my trust. It's no big deal, Dr. Goldstein urged. Soon enough, all of us are going to be back on Earth again with as many strawberries as we can eat. There was a beautiful, perfectly ripe strawberry lying atop the pile of plants. I couldn't resist it anymore. I picked it up, relishing even the feel of it, and then held it up to my nose and inhaled. It smelled incredible, and it tasted even better. I had to turn my back to the greenhouse window so no one would see that I was getting special treatment. My first bite was small but loaded with flavor. I had forgotten how amazing food could taste. When was the last time you checked to make sure the apple seeds were here? I asked. Dr. Goldstein grew a bit flustered as though this question made her uncomfortable. I honestly don't know. Like I said, it never occurred to me that someone might take them. The fruits, definitely, but not the seeds. Someone might have taken them as much as 2 months ago, which was before you put the sensor on the greenhouse door. Yes. Which meant that pretty much anyone on the base could have stolen the seeds and not been noticed, assuming they had planned the crime well ahead of time. What about more recently? I asked. Since you've been monitoring the door, have you seen anyone sneak in here? Oh, dash, I've practically seen everyone on this base sneak in here. I almost gagged on my next small bite of strawberry in surprise. Everyone? This is a very special place at Moonbase Alpha. It might not be very much like Earth, but it's the closest thing we have. Quite often, when it's late at night and someone thinks they're the only one awake, they'll come in here, usually on the way back from the bathroom. I thought back to the feeling I'd had when I'd first entered the greenhouse earlier that day. If I had known about that sensation before, I probably would have been sneaking into the greenhouse every chance I got. Did you ever notice anyone doing anything suspicious? I asked. Well, quite a few people snuck a little something to eat. Really? Who? Again, pretty much everyone. Even Nina raided this place, and your own parents. They did? They came together, and they only took a cherry tomato between them. I'm sure they thought no one would miss it, but I know every single fruit and vegetable in this place. You didn't see anyone fiddling around with the seeds? No, but I did see some people who came in here and didn't eat anything. Like who? Dr. Goldstein looked out the windows warily as though worried that someone might be watching us. No one was, though. Even so, she still lowered her voice. Dr. Jenke and Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez both did. Together? No, at separate times, more than a week apart, in fact, and both spent quite some time in here. Now, they may have simply been enjoying the sensation of being in this room, but then they might have swiped the seeds as well. I wasn't aware of either Dr. Jenke or Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez having a major grudge against Lars, but then, like everyone else at MBA, they probably hated the man. I wondered if that would be enough to drive someone to murder, especially in a place where tensions were running high and oxygen was running low. In addition, Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez definitely had issues with Patton and Lily, who had been terrible to Roddy. I wondered if, perhaps, she'd poisoned the lutefisk to take out one of them, not realizing that Lars was the only one who ate it. And then there's Lily Schoberg, Dr. Goldstein said. She came in here and didn't eat anything? Yes, unlike her brother, that pig Patton has gobbled up so much of my food that I've had to get Nina to intervene. How so? She told Lars that if Patton ate anything else in here without permission, she'd put Patton in charge of acquiring the human fertilizer from the composter. That seems to have done the trick. But as for Lily, she comes in here quite a lot, late at night, and just sits among the plants. Now, that didn't sound much like Lily to me, but then, even though I'd been cooped up with Lily at MBA for several months, I had to admit that I didn't know that much about her at all. She had never wanted much to do with me and had barely spoken to me unless she had to. So maybe she had to come into the greenhouse simply to experience the wonders of life. Or maybe she had it in for her father. And there's Chang. Chang? Yeah, he was rooting around in here for a few minutes about a week ago. I figured he must have been looking for something to eat, but when I checked in the morning, not a single fruit or vegetable was missing. And you're sure you would have noticed? Well, this isn't a very big greenhouse, and I'm in it for at least 8 hours a day. I know every last edible morsel in here. Through the wall, I heard a commotion in the rec room. People were starting to raise their voices, although it was too muffled for me to figure out who was speaking or what they were saying. I figured it was probably somebody yelling at Roddy for hogging the VR system again. I took one last bite of strawberry, wondering about Chang. Chang had been poking around in the greenhouse, and now the apple seeds had gone missing. And if anybody was smart enough to know how to make cyanide from apple seeds, it was Chang. Chang had been rummaging through the food storage the night before, and shortly afterward, Lars Schoberg had been poisoned. In the rec room, the voices were getting louder and angrier. I could now make two of them out, Patton and Lily Schoberg. I did my best to ignore them. If Roddy had run afoul of the Schoberg twins again, then that was his problem. I had wound up in too much trouble defending him against them before. And besides, I had other things to think about. No one had a grudge against Lars Schoberg like Chang Kowalski. And as much as I hated to think that Chang might have poisoned Lars, he was an awfully good suspect. Therefore, it made sense that someone ought to search his room for evidence. And thanks to Nina, that person was me. There was a shriek from the rec room, a shriek that I knew all too well. The Schobergs weren't picking on Roddy. They were picking on Violet. Chang's room would have to wait. I had to face the Schobergs first.